Please welcome Eileen Smith.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here among such a great group of people. I truly believe that the pro-life people are closest to the heart of God because life is closest to the heart of God. And I think God just rubs off on you because you're just so close to His passion. I'm here to tell you a story tonight, a very sad story. It's a story about my daughter, Laura. We adopted Laura when she was 4.5. I have 3 natural children, and someone was disposing of her. She was adopted from Honduras, and they decided after having her from the age 2.5 to 4.5 that they really didn't like her. She was also physically abused, and I got a phone call to come get her. It was our joy. I went down there, and she was only 4.5 years old, like I said. Went into the home, and she sat on my lap, and I rubbed her back for about 20 minutes, and the mother said to her, "Laura, would you like to go live with Eileen Smith?" I was a total stranger to the family. And she shook her head and said yes. She walked out with me that day, out of abuse and into a whole lot of love. And we thought we were rescuing her, but she brought so much more to our family. And it was a joy and a privilege to have her in her life. On September 13th of 2007, our phone rang. We lived in the Jersey Shore, and the caller ID said it was my daughter Laura. We had just taken her back up to Cape Cod, Massachusetts, from spending this summer with us. We so enjoyed having her there. And we missed her already, but when I answered the phone, I didn't hear her voice. I heard screaming and crying, guttural crying, and I only could make out 4 words initially, and the words were Laura, emergency room, not breathing, and abortion. To hear one of those words in the sentence that has to do with your child will strike terror in the heart of a parent. To hear all 3 of them in the same sentence changed my life forever. I was able to calm the girl down. The girl was Karen, my daughter's best friend. She was crying hysterically, telling me that Laura had went for an abortion. And when she got there to pick her up, the emergency room was there. I mean, the ambulance was there to bring her to the emergency room. Laura had recently gotten engaged that past April, a few months back. Her fiance got shipped out to Iraq, and that's why she came to spend a couple months with us after that. She found herself pregnant from that reunion that they had. I don't know why she chose abortion. My daughter was raised in a pro-life home, a Christian home. We were very active in church. Laura considered herself pro-life. When her friends would have an abortion, she would come home crying about it, telling me she was so upset. She just couldn't understand why someone would do that. That's why we don't understand why Laura did that. Well, I got through to the emergency room. I thought she was still alive at that point. Went through endless rounds of pressing buttons if I spoke English. By the time I got to the doctor, it seemed like an eternity. And I don't think they wanted to tell me. They just kept talking about how Laura came there and what they did for her. And that's all right, because I didn't want them to get to any at the end of that conversation, because I was afraid what they were going to tell me. And the whole time they were talking, in my heart I was praying. I said, God, please give her a 50-50 chance, God. God, I have great faith. Even if you give her a 90-10 chance, God, I can handle it. But Lord, just give her a chance. And then the doctor was speaking so gently, and the 2 words he said hit me like thunder. He said, she's gone. My heart sank, my head tilted. The oxygen was literally sucked out of my room. And that's ironic, too, because that's exactly how my daughter died. She died for lack of oxygen on a table. This man was practicing third world medicine in the medical mecca of the world right outside of Boston. He was a Harvard fellow for over 35 years. But he did not have any medical staffing. He did not have any emergency equipment. And he didn't even notice my daughter was dead till the procedure was over. It is an awful, awful thing. We went to the emergency room. We threw some clothes in a suitcase and drove to Hyannis as fast as we could. But then as we were driving, I knew what was waiting for me at the other end. I started asking my husband, please slow down. Why are we going so fast? There's nothing we can do. I don't want to face this. We finally got to the ER. No, it wasn't the ER, it was the morgue at 2 in the morning. I've had a lot of experiences in my life, but nothing prepares you for this. They took us down to the morgue, and out of the morgue they wheeled a gurney with a body bag on it. When they unzipped that body bag, I still hear that noise in my sleep. It echoed in the hallways of the hospital basement. There lied my beautiful daughter, 22 years old, so full of life, just starting her life. I sat with her for half an hour trying to wake her up, saying, Laura, please wake up. I just couldn't comprehend that that was my daughter, lifeless. I said, God, you could have taken just half of her. If you just left me half of her, there would have been enough spirit in that girl to go around, because she was so full of life, so effervescent. But you know, I am a Christian, and I would talk to people about my faith sometime, and I would say, what's the worst thing that could ever happen to you? And I would say, it's lose a child. I said, but if it ever happened to me, I would have to thank God for the time I had them, because they are gifts to our life. And if God gives us them and then decides it's time for them to go home, I would have to thank him for the time that I had them. I never wanted to walk that out, but I had to. And I thank God that God, with great tragedy comes a great grace. I have been experiencing the grace that I have never experienced in my life. God is a good God. And I didn't ask God why. I didn't question God why. I just prayed immediately after that, God, please bring something good out of this that I can bear it. Me standing here before you tonight is part of that something good that he has brought out of my daughter's death. I thought if I could just convince a young girl not to have an abortion using Laura's story, that would help me get through it. Well, lives are being saved all over the country because Laura's story has traveled all over the country. And not just by me. I've become a national speaker overnight. This was not my plan, but this was God's plan. I could not bury my daughter after the funeral because the autopsy took 5.5 months to get the results. I had a pathologist in the wings waiting because the Boston Medical Examiner had such a bad reputation, and I wanted to make sure that they found the reason, because I knew what happened. Because I met with the doctor 10 days after my daughter's death. He finally called me. He said, I'll meet with you, Mrs. Smith, in a public place, and don't bring your husband. Amazing, isn't it? Don't bring your husband. So I went to the Boston Harbor Hotel and waited for this monster, who I thought a monster, surrounded by weddings and celebration. It was so surreal, waiting for the man that killed my daughter. And instead of the hunched over monster with fangs and hair all over his face, in walks this tall, thin, gentle Asian man. He'd be the kind of person you'd want to have over for dinner if you didn't know what he did for a living. But I did know what he did for a living. I couldn't even shake his hand. I sat down with him, and I at that point, 10 days, I had a list of questions. And he answered all my questions. He showed me the list of drugs he gave her about this long, and it was either mother's intuition or divine revelation. I knew he killed her. Of course, I found out that his reason for meeting with me was to convince me that it was Laura's fault that Laura died. He says, I racked my brain, Mrs. Smith, thinking what I could have done differently to save your daughter, and I come up with nothing. All she needed was air. That's why he met with me. But after talking to him for an hour, I prayed. I said, God, is there something you want me to tell this man? Because I'm done talking to him. And out of my mouth came these words. I said, the blood of my daughter is on your hands. The blood of my grandchild is on your hands. The blood of every life you've ever taken is on your hands. And one day you will stand before the Creator of life and give an answer for every life you've ever taken, unless you stop now and spend the rest of your life for life. I said, your mother gave you life, and you have no right to take away life. Only God can give life, and only God can take away life. And he said, Mrs. Smith, I heard those Bible stories. I grew up around Presbyterians. I said, well, you may know the story, but you don't know the God of the story, because if you knew the God of the story, you could never do what you did. And I left the auditorium or the lobby where I was, and I had this sense in my heart that he was going to stop doing abortions, because I did ask him. I asked him on the life and death of my daughter that he would consider to stop doing abortions. And he said, Mrs. Smith, I will consider that. And when I left, I thought, God, is he going to stop doing abortions? I naively thought that I had a sense he was going to stop, naively thinking that he would have a change of heart. It wasn't so. He did stop doing abortion, but it wasn't because of his change of heart. It's because his medical license was taken away on February 20th of this year. Thank God. Yes, we can applaud that. Thank you.